because I've not been served lunch yet. And they tend to forget the fact that when I was in prison, I was never served proper lunch. And one of the conditions I imposed to all my hosts is that serve me proper lunch to compensate for the loss for the many years. Anyway, thank you very much, and I must commend the organizers for continuing the Singapore Summit. For us in Malaysia, and I believe for the region, this is an important opportunity for us to reflect and see the direction of not only our countries, but our economies. Malaysia has seen a phenomenal change on May 9th. I can't claim credit because I was in prison resting. It was Tun Mahathir, Aziza, and other colleagues worked very hard. And the step was unprecedented, defying the predictions of pundits and political analysts alike, including those in Singapore. They voted into power the Pakatan Harapan coalition, both at the national level and the provinces. The traditional strongholds of the incumbent power fell like dominoes. There was no doubt there was a nationwide tsunami. The elections in 2008 and 2013 was duped by the then Prime Minister as a Chinese tsunami. But this year's election was, I said, unprecedented because you are able to garner support from all races, all regions in the country. Cutting across ethnic, cultural, religious, and geographical boundaries, spoke in one clear voice: we want change. Enough of corruption, enough of racism. In then, with the government that holds out the promise for real accountability. I use the term democratic accountability. Because craving for democracy without proper accountability through a free media, judicial independence is not complete. I say this again with great circumspection. Holding out the promise is a pledge. It is a sacrosanct declaration of intent, which of course must be tested by deed and not by pronouncements, slogans, or lip service. Its success will be marked by the implementation of programs and initiatives by the people for the people. We embark on this bold journey at a time when fascism is coming into vogue and democracy is under duress around the world, more so in Muslim countries and Muslim societies. This is something, therefore, that Asians and Muslims can celebrate as a remarkable and positive development. We have articulated a vision for the nation that is based on the fundamental principles that have been integral to the reform, or what we term as the reformasi movement. Strengthening the institutions of governance so that never again will we allow the executive to wield so much power and do so much damage to the nation. Indeed, I must commend Dr. Mahathir, because in the first 100 days, some major steps have already been taken. The anti-corruption body, the MACC, hitherto answerable only to the Prime Minister, is now made accountable to Parliament. One of the great failures that we will be paying the price for years to come was that the Anti-Corruption Commission was not able to function independently. The Auditor General's office has also been earmarked to be independent of the executive. This will go very far in ensuring real and effective oversight of Malaysia's financials. We also need to ensure that the judiciary is independent. And I have a clear interest here. And the misconduct by the judges and lawyers carries swift and significant consequences. Judges must be insulated from political interferences. Our best efforts at reforming the system can come to naught if deficiencies in the international architecture of capital are not addressed. The 1MDB debacle provides us with ample reason to be concerned that these reforms are not taking place. Billions of dollars were siphoned off across the global network of enablers of money laundering and grand theft. I must commend some authorities, including the Department of Justice of the United States of America, giving us the support in the investigations to be able to at least secure some of this money squandered from the nation. This tells us that there is no room for complacency even in the world's most advanced economies and financial systems when it comes to strengthening governance. The importance of a free media cannot be overstated. Although I've shared this with former Prime Minister Chok Tong that a free media sounds nice to most people, but for those who are in power, it's not something that is well cherished. But it will take discipline, tolerance, and the commitment to be able to support this initiative, because it is an antidote, the most effective antidote to the arrogance of power. Almost overnight, the mainstream media in Malaysia took its first breath of freedom on the evening of elections. The media is certainly free now to report the truth, to interpret the truth, or to debunk some of the what was considered at least sacrosanct in our countries. But the vestiges of political and corporate influence in media still remain. And unless those issues of governance and accountability are addressed, then the credibility of the media in an era of fake news would remain suspect. To suggest that our government has inherited a fiscal mess would be an understatement. As we entered the ministries and started taking control of the reins of power, we are learning the full extent of how the previous administration mismanaged the country. I would go as far as saying this was a case of criminal financial management. Notwithstanding, we have had accolades from analysts, from rating agencies, but now when we go through the accounts, it's horrendous crimes committed at the expense of the country and the masses. Fortunately, we still have strong macroeconomic fundamentals. Prime Minister Mahathir has taken some dramatic steps towards reining in spending, not too popular, but necessary to consolidate our position and to ensure that the economy remains stable. In the short term, this is critical. But I do not believe the fiscal scenario is at all in dire straits. Sound management will get us back on solid footing so that the economy can go beyond just treading water. Looking to the future, mere wishful thinking will not get us back to the status of an Asian tiger. A lot will have to happen between now and then to make that dream a reality. Rooting out corruption is an integral part of the strategy, but that alone is not enough. A bucket would simply, if you plug the holes in it. We have to find new ways of stimulating growth and revenue in the economy through efficiency, innovation, and creativity, and making sure that Malaysia continues or becomes an attractive destination for foreign direct investments. As a person who has some limited influence in managing the economy in the past, I would certainly admit the fact that Malaysia would not be able to achieve that status without its pro-market policies and ensuring that the country remains attractive for foreign investments. We have to deal with our bureaucracy, which is clearly bloated, taking on a life and purpose of its own, barely resembling the function for which it was initially intended. I concede that this is a delicate process in a period where there is mounting unemployment. In the election manifesto, education was given a priority. A strong education system is the engine for the future indigenous growth. Serial mismanagement of the education system has led to a chronic problem of mediocre teaching in the absence of a strategy on how to prepare for the next generation of competent leaders. The unemployment and underemployment rate among the graduates is one of the factors that contributed to the strong support we have from younger Malaysians. We need to attract the best educators to come back to Malaysia to teach, and we need to give our best and brightest students a good reason not to seek better educational opportunities abroad. This has some bearing on the obsolete, what I consider as an obsolete new economic policy that is race-based. In 2007, I articulated a very controversial proposal to depart from that strategy which became so sacrosanct among the Malays, the new economic policy. It has its rationale to give confidence and security to the majority of the Malays, relatively poorer, but I think we have to pass that. It is now considered obsolete, because whilst propelling economy upwards, I do not necessarily ignore the importance of affirmative action based on need. The marginalized, the poor, the majority are still Malays and indigenous people, the Chinese in the urban squatters, the Indians in the estates, the Kadazans and Ibans in Sabah and Sarawak. These issues must be addressed. So meritocracy has its basis and must be supported, but affirmative action policies that would cater for the plight of the underprivileged, the poor, and the marginalized must be continued, but it must be need-based and not race-based. Now, the other concern about Malaysian economy is the cozy relationship between the public and the private sector. We tend to be criticized because from privatization, we are now seen to be renationalizing. We must recognize that state intervention is fraught with risks and prone to abuse. Hence, transparency and accountability must remain the touchstones of economic governance, lest we revert to a time when taxpayer money is regularly used to bail out well-connected companies. The government, therefore, must have a role in to play in shaping markets and addressing externalities. But we cannot ignore that too much influence will distort markets and prevent us from creating incentives that stimulate innovation and risk-taking. The economy must cut free from the growing power of government favoritism, corporate monopolies, and the regulations that shut small business and entrepreneurs out of the game. All the while, our new government must remain faithful to the pledge of ensuring distributive justice while promoting economic growth. Again, I reiterate, the need for affirmative action should be directed towards the needy, all of them, irrespective of race and religion. Only then can Malaysia be seen as a just nation that is equally committed to the development of all people. We must therefore be very vigilant against any sign of slouching towards perverse patronage that in the past created a breeding ground of rent seekers. Moral hazard must remain a vocabulary of history. Going forward, we need healthy competition, free but fair trade, and a new and resilient social safety net that considers the needs of all citizens. We are, of course, confronting turbulent times. Some consider this post-truth, which I find great difficulty in understanding, but certainly it is post-normal. Among political leadership, the economic turbulence, IT revolution, it is quite difficult to anticipate all developments and reasons. Assumptions about how the world works are falling to pieces, and more sinister ideologies are taking root and spreading. Pessimism about the current order is on the rise. I remember quoting Herman Kahn in the 70s that politics, I don't know why I entered politics despite his statement, uncharismatic and low moral profession. I don't know to tell you about business. I'm confined myself to politics. Just 36% of Germans, 24% of Canadians, and 9% of the French thought that the next generation would be better off than their parents. In America, the figure holds at 37%. This sentiment has contributed to the rise of ultra-nationalist ideologies and the resurgence of authoritarianism around the world as people lose faith in the status quo. I'm still trying to organize myself. So in prison, I only speak Malay. So Giorgio may be surprised that my pronunciation has declined. The status quo is what was promised by the spread of democracy, free markets, global trade and technology, greater peace and prosperity to all. But as large swathes of people start to feel betrayed by that promise, those institutions upon which it is built and reinforced have not put forth an adequate response other than more of the same. Political philosophies cannot survive solely on the glory of their past achievement. Unless there is a renewal of oath and progress towards a better future, they will die. We cannot assume, therefore, that the tremendous success of the last century, in which hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty around the world, will be enough of a track record to carry us forth into the next 100 years. It's often repeated by Stiglitz and others. The United States, once the beacon of democracy around the world, is rapidly submitting to the dictates of what considered a fringe element, but now represents a solid 35% of the population. To satisfy that segment, nativist, anti-immigrant, anti-trade policies are being implemented at breakneck speed. All societies go through a cycle of birth and rebirth, which is why ASEAN nations must also anticipate a future that is not simply a linear projection of its past successes and failures. At a time when the whole world is undergoing a realignment, ASEAN nations could forge a new path that strengthens our collective ties through collaboration on infrastructure development and realization of the ASEAN Market Connectivity Plan, which would strengthen collaboration among our regional grouping to address the need for new infrastructure, a more friendly regulatory environment for innovation and investment, and overall integration in trade, travel, and logistics. We believe, therefore, that there is a tremendous untapped potential in the economy, and we will do everything that we can to promote growth. We have to improve the investment climate for foreign direct investments and look for ways to make the doing of business in Malaysia much easier. We are also looking to make new inroads into trading relationships that offer untapped potential across South Asia and Far East, and to reassure our colleagues in Singapore, that includes Singapore very much so, and China. Going forward, I have great optimism that we can transform Malaysia into a new economic force in the region, with vibrant pro-growth policies and a stable and clean business environment where the rule of law prevails and democratic institutions are firmly in place. I believe, inshallah, God willing, Malaysia will emerge once again as an exemplary economic power, driving progress and development in the region. Terima kasih. Thank you.
Terima kasih, Datuk. If I can invite you to take a seat. And if I can invite our conference chairman, Mr. Ho Kwon Ping, to facilitate the dialogue. Terima kasih banyak-banyak.
Now the difficult part.
Thank you. Please sit down, sir. Yes, if you said now the difficult part, you can't imagine how many people have approached me earlier on asking me the many questions that they want to ask you. So I'm going to start with an ironic one. It is a question which is intended to be provocative. It's a question at the same time which has been probably asked of you many times. It's also a question for which you have probably already got an answer, and many people here who have heard you elsewhere already know the answer, but they've said to me that they are watching for the nuance by which you answer. That will be interesting. And the question obviously is, when you were released, there were announcements made about a timeline for your succession. There has since then been some speculation when the Prime Minister said that he might remain if there was demand for him to remain, and many other things happening in the media of which you know about. So I think people here are interested, they know your answer, they're prepared for it, but they're interested to hear how you're going to answer it. So please, sir.
Kwon Ping, did you realize that I suffered enough in prison? Why do you want to impose difficulty? I thought I'm coming to Singapore to enjoy
because we want to help you as much as we can, preparing you for a time when you'll be asked many more questions of this sort. And I can guarantee you, and I would like the audience to confirm, that in this room you really have good friends who wish the best for you. And only good friends help to prepare you for when you might have a less friendly audience.
Absolutely. Only good friends will ask strong, tough, provocative questions. Now, all right. In January this year, when I was still in prison, the party leaders, Tun Mahathir, Aziza, and the other DAP, Lim Guan Eng, and Muhammad Sabu of Amanah, converged and agreed upon a plan. One, the manifesto, institutional reforms. Two, that we endorse Mahathir as the Prime Minister, and to secure an immediate release for Anwar, and Anwar to assume premiership. And they all signed. Now, it's 4 months since the elections. My working relationship with Mahathir is not only cordial, but close. I know some of you are cynical. I can see them smile. But in all honesty, I would say this. And I told this to Mahathir. We used to joke about it. I said, our team, when I was finance and then deputy prime minister, working with him, was unprecedented. We were very close. We worked together extremely well, and we had such devotion for the country. And we just were obsessed to make sure that Malaysia succeed, becomes a vibrant economy. And then, as Yeats said, things fall apart, the center cannot hold. And true enough, we became, again, I think in recent history, very bitter enemies. Rancorous exchange, no holds barred. And I was in the prison for 6 years. This was just tough times. And then he came, met me in court. He couldn't see me. Nobody could see me in prison except Aziza and the children. So he came to court and said, Anwar, we have a problem now. I said to myself, oh please, I can forgive, but don't bother me again, please. I didn't say that. This was I thought myself. But he seems quite genuine. He says, no, we have to save the country. And we need to team up, because the whole institution is destroyed. You can't hear about any positive news in Wall Street Journal, New York Times, or Washington Financial Times, except for one MDB. And there's growing cynicism against whatever's being said by the government. I was exceedingly polite with him. I did not give a commitment. Aziza was with me, looked very sad. My 2 daughters in the corner were crying, failing to understand why Papa has to entertain this man. Month passed. To Mahathir's credit, he was more focused on the agenda for reform. He supported our position on judicial independence, free media, ridding the country of corruption. And he said he will do whatever is required to help save the country. And he will serve for a while and secure Anwar's release and allow him to assume what is then, he said so rightfully, his as the new Prime Minister. So I have no reason, therefore, after this month, to question his sincerity. He has undertaken this reform agenda. But I know him, many of you know him. Of course, our style is quite different. Sometimes, some of his statements and remarks seem to be unduly provocative. Singaporeans, of course, have learned that a long time ago. Now, that refers to the Chinese. But any way possible, when asked, I said to him, look, in the overall context, Mahathir is for reform, for investments, and will not discriminate when it comes to potential investments into the country. There were deals that we were suspicious of, which some of us feel quite dubious, or smack of corruption involved, or, for that matter, that the country can ill afford, given the state of the economy now, that need to be either cancelled or postponed. And that's all. But otherwise, please be assured that I, on my part, have no reason to doubt his sincerity. He has been reiterating every other day, because everybody kept on asking. I don't blame you, because even in Malaysia, the media will ask, are you sure? He said, yes, Anwar will be my successor. And then they asked me, you trust him? I say, yes, I do. So it is, I think both of us should have a taped answer that we can just make ready to question us. Thank you.
To follow up on that, to what extent do you think Mahathir's participation in the elections this year round made the difference, or would have the coalition won anyway?
I would say that in 2013, many of you know that we won 52% of popular votes. We were not able to form the government. We were short of numbers of members of parliament. So we did extremely well. But still, we needed that critical base support. And in 2018, I was in prison. We thought that the ideal candidate then to lead the coalition was Mahathir. So I believe that he was also instrumental in affecting that change. What was remarkable, not well appreciated by many outside observers, that at the age of 92, then last year, he went on such campaign trail, clearly punishing schedule, and every day and night was there meeting electorates. And people then tend to also realize that, give him a chance. He's just asked, let me make amends and give me a chance to correct the excesses and the mistakes. And therefore, I would concede. All politicians have difficulty in conceding that people are better than him. But I would, in all humility, this is what ex-PM Chok Tong was telling me about what you learn in prison. One of the things is humility. As T.S. Eliot have said, the only humility, the only wisdom one can hope to acquire is humility. Humility is endless. So one of the great things I was able to do in prison is to memorize his poems and Shakespeare.
So you have to be careful. You were also telling us earlier with ESM Go that you've been accused of quoting Shakespeare in audiences like this when you quote the Quran when you're with political rallies otherwise. So here we won't tell people that you've been quoting T.S. Eliot at a grouping here. However,
people tend to be critical. They said, Anwar, I can't trust him, because he's chameleon in a way. He quotes Shakespeare in the urban area in New York, and he quotes the Quran in the district in Pakistan. Of course, you don't expect me to quote Quran in New York and Shakespeare in this remote village in Pakistan. So I do what I think should be done. Thank you.
You alluded to time in prison. I just wanted to say something and then ask you a question. I think there are many CEOs here, of course, most of whom have not been to prison, but have been through very difficult times. Well, some may have gone to prison for different reasons than you have, like I've gone to ISA for a short period. But I think there's a lot of people in this room who've gone through adversities. And I think there's, to the same extent that there is a lot of admiration for Dr. Mahathir as a person, who at the age of 93 can come back and lead a country with vigor and energy, there's also a huge amount of admiration for you of how you have gone through imprisonment 3 times with no assurance at all that you would end your political life or even end your life coming back as you have done today. And I think it would be useful for us to hear from you from a personal point of view. How do you go through such an adversity? How do you go through being a deputy prime minister to then becoming a detainee, and being released again, going back in again, with no assurance that here today you're going to be a prime minister in waiting? How do you keep your spirits up? Because that's something at a personal level that I think many people in this room, for very different reasons, as we go through financial crises and private crises, how do we find the will to go on?
On a lighter note, when I was released in 2004, there's so many times I was released in jail, so that I got to quote you the year. Because I'm talking about the release in 2004. I was invited by Mandela to Joburg with the whole family. And when he saw my children, we got young then, he was visibly, he was affected and was in tears. And he said to me, Anwar, I don't know why we did it. I was looking at my children. We must be mad or crazy. So I said to him, Madiba, we are not mad, but crazy, I totally agree with you. And there's a lighter note. On a more serious note, Kennedy in his Profiles in Courage talks about courage of conviction, tenacity of purpose. I think in leadership, in any struggle, you must have conviction. And conviction can be affected with courage. You must have then the tenacity of purpose. But I would add on, you must have compassion. We talk about business or governance. Compassion for the millions who are marginalized, who depend, who love you, who support purely with the hope that you are going to help and champion their cause. You can't then become a leader, then start stealing from public purse. So compassion is one. But in my limited experience, certainly forgiveness is another. We have a larger agenda. We have a country to serve. In our case, we say save Malaysia. And okay, I suffered. It was a very painful decision. Mind you, it was painful. It was not easy. I'm not a hypocrite to suggest to you that, no, I was right, I'm philosophically it's okay. You have to move on. It's not simple. I know how we, the family and the colleagues, suffered. I know how difficult it was when I had to sit with Aziza and Nuriza towards the end and finally endorse Mahathir as the Prime Minister, as our leader. But we decided, again with conviction, because we want to save the country. So what we learn? You must have principles and conviction. And to me, religion plays a part. And my years in prison, I had virtually read on Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, the Chinese philosophy. I remember discussing George Yeo. It's beyond Needham, the science and the civilization. Needham. We did discuss those years. It's beyond that. It's again humanity, again values as integrating force in society and culture, and compassion. And you can't move if you are inflicted with that disease in the heart of getting angry and not prepared to forgive. You have to let go and move on, because For the people, for Malaysians is what? For Anwar to be angry with the past? Yes, they can talk about it, they sympathize, or they even cry. But then, for general Malaysians, is what it takes to ensure that Malaysia emerge as a successful nation, economically vibrant, because only that we can share with the people. And therefore, if you use that as a priority for the future, then you must be able to forgive and forget the past. Thank you.
Let me just ask you one last question before we open to the floor. A very different one, but you mentioned about how Malaysia can actually be an example to the Islamic world. There has been talk about now a concept like a Malaysia Spring, similar to Arab Spring, and how the example of the government coming into power in Malaysia could set an example not only in other countries, but in particular in other Islamic countries too. Do you see your new government trying to play a more international role in encouraging more democratization, accountability, etc., in other Islamic countries of the world?
Mahathir is a great internationalist. In the past, I was Deputy Prime Minister, most of the domestic policies he left to me, and he was traveling overseas. But now I think the consensus in the leadership is to focus on the economy and institutional governance. And of course, we have lots of visitors, friends overseas wanting to know exactly what happened, what transpired. And to me, we need to also to articulate this view that the notion that Muslim countries or Muslim societies are unable to grasp democratic values is debunked. We are not the first. We have seen Indonesia, we have seen to extent Turkey, but in Malaysia, the change, the transformation is phenomenal without a loss of one life. Or probably some years in prison, but not one life lost. And I think this is a great feat in modern times. And therefore, it is a challenge in as much as for the Muslim world, but for Malaysia to prove that we're able to sustain this. But again, what's unique in Malaysia is that this was achieved with a total mobilization of forces among Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, Hindus. And this is to me remarkable feat. People say, well, I know you are a bit diluted as a Muslim because you tend to embrace the rest. The party I lead is a multiracial, multireligious party. The vision that we have is a multi-religious, multiracial vision. I am, as a person, a practicing Muslim. But for the nation, for the society, it is a multicultural, multireligious society. And I was in Turkey, I was in London, my friends asked, I said, don't give credit just because Malaysia is the so-called Muslim country or Muslim majority. Because we won because of Muslim support, Chinese support, Indian support. And the most remote area in Sarawak called Puncak Borneo, the most remote, which I did not anticipate a victory, is called Puncak Borneo, and we won that seat. You know why? Because of the wisdom of the masses. Never underestimate the wisdom of the people who finally decide what to do, what is right, what is wrong, to rid the country of corruption and abuse of power. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now open the floor to questions. There's an app which you can write your questions if you wish to, or if you rather do it a more traditional way, just raise your hands and I will note you. Any questions? I think is it Piyush? Piyush, please. And Zainal after that, please.
Dr. Sri Piyush Gupta from DBS Bank. It's good to see you up and out about again. My question is very simple. Do you see in Tun Mahathir at 93 a change and a different person from the person you knew 5-10 years ago?
Mahathir is Mahathir. Tough, frank, provocative, doesn't mince words. Okay, we all understand him. But is he committed to the reform? Yes. Has he made it clear that Malaysia is now and must emerge as a democracy? Democratic accountability? Yes. Does he believe in anti-corruption commission that is independent? Yes. Does he tolerate a free media? Yes. So in that sense, of course he has changed. But it was his personality, his cynicism, I had to bear with it, which is fine. But when it comes to the issue of governance, he has agreed, and we have no reason to question that. In the last 4 months, he has been consistent and he's been tough. In fact, in my discussions with him, he seems to be quite impatient. He said, no, our clicks are a bit slow. The public servants are not pushing along this reform. So you can sense that vigor in him, which I, of course, admire. So I think I must give him that credit. There are, of course, points of issues that I may choose to disagree. I mean, the style, sometimes the combative mood, that because then I said to you, I used to tell him, sir, you continue like this. I have a job, the old job of firefighting, because you tend to say it, but that's him. To me, I would concede and tolerate some difference in styles. You have, your managers, CEOs, you come, and there are different styles. But what is important is that on the fundamental issues, on principles, on policies, we are committed to this agenda. And I want to make sure that this work, this transition is peaceful. There's no problem between Anwar and Mahathir, because I want the country to be on a strong foundation. Thank you.
Thank you. Zaino, please. Any other questions from this side later on that I can recognize after Zaino? Okay, later on there. Thank you. Zaino, please. Microphone here, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Komping. It's good to see you out, Brother Anwar, and welcome back to Singapore. Because from the Anwar I know for a long time, since the 70s, I know you are a friend of Singapore. I have two questions. One is about race, and the other about Singapore-Malaysia relations. When we are faced with a situation, we have a Prime Minister who is 93-year-old, and Prime Minister in waiting who has been out of circulation for a long while. Sometimes you wonder whether short-term needs may overtake the long-term ideals. So the area which is many people's mind is race politics in in Malaysia. I know you spoke about it. You spoke yourself about the results, the tsunamis. But has race politics or race in the economy really settled down? Or do we have to wait for the dust to settle down? And will it be, what kind of a challenge it will continue to be? Because we know it has bugged the system for a long while. And how do you see it going forward? Race politics, race relations. You talk about tsunami, but when we see Kelantan results, you see Terengganu results, people are wondering how the Malays there also are thinking in terms of the change. And in that same context, how do you see Singapore-Malaysia relations? Beyond the race, question of race, but the question of the long-term targets and models what we like to look for. Thank you.
You have all experts here. You have you, Tony Tan, Chok Tong. They're very familiar with the subject. Why do you ask me such questions? Now, on race, I think any observer or student of Malaysian political change or development would concede that there is therefore a clear departure from past policies. You look at the composition of the cabinet, you look at the Minister of Finance, which has not been the case for the last many, many decades. In fact, people tend to assume that after 69 or earlier, you will not have a non-Malay finance minister or in the key ministries. But this is not the case. We are prepared to showcase that there is this policy adjustments or change. Is this too radical? Yes and no, because we have also to cater for the sentiments. As you rightly pointed out, that in the Malay heartland, in the rural Malay heartland, there is also a sense of insecurity and the onslaught by the Islamic Party, which I don't believe represent the more moderate, objective view of Islam. But that's of course a separate agenda, because the vast majority in the West Coast, including Malays and Muslims, are with us. But we need to be mindful of that. But in terms of policies, are we prepared to take that bold step to protect the interests of our nation, and at the same time assuring the Malays and the Muslims that, look, in no way are we going to marginalize you or ignore your role in society or in government. Because the thinking of the younger Malays also have to be taken into consideration. First, the right policy must be a fair, just policy, period. If I have suffered, for example, 10 and a half, almost 11 years in prison, and do not understand what freedom and justice is, I'm just a hopeless being. So I understand, and attempt to understand what freedom and justice means. And that would require us to appreciate the humanitarian values that transcend race and religion. That is clearly our policy now. Now, pockets of poverty in the midst of plenty, marginalized areas, poor, downtrodden, that must be handled. And it means the majority of the Malays, I'll tell my Chinese friends, you go to some of the remote villages where they become so fanatical because they feel they have been completely marginalized. No good education, no good health services. But this is not a racial equation. The solution is not race-based. It must be need-based. And I've not met any Chinese friend, Malaysian Chinese, that is opposed to a policy to help the poor Malays. Their contentions have always been, why deny us a place when we qualify either in education or in business? I fully understand and appreciate that. So there is that clear, to me, a policy change. And to me, it's irreversible. At least in as long as I'm in politics, there's clearly this. In 98, when I was sacked, I had a choice. I can form, I think I have a strong Malay base. I've been active in Islamic work, you know, you are familiar with that. I think the natural method would be to form a Malay or Muslim party. And I think then form a coalition with the Chinese base or Indian parties. But no, I decided at that time, no. If I were to move on, I persuaded my friends, you want me to continue to struggle, although I was in prison, it has to be a new Malaysia. A new Malaysia means not ignoring the importance of the Malays or Islam, but a new Malaysia must be multiracial, multireligious. That we did, and I should say, Alhamdulillah, thank God, we were successful for now. We have to sustain that. Now, Singapore-Malaysia relations are the problem. I don't see any problem. Yeah. Of course, perception is such, you know, and it's also the style. I used to tell, I don't know whether PM Chok Tong, former PM Chok Tong remembers. I said, you know, Singapore and Singapore leaders are too serious and business-like. We tend to, you know, a bit cultural sikit and then enjoy sikit. relax sikit, and give and take sikit. Singapore's dollars and cents. So he joked. So the following month, he invited me for Pavarotti show. Well, he took my words seriously, but unfortunately I could not, because at that time there was some political development, there were some legislation, but it was interesting. He took my words seriously, so he invited me to attend free Pavarotti show. I would have loved to attend, but there's on a lighter note. Don't take me serious on that. But I think we should. We are neighbors. It's strong. Historically, economically, it is strong. We cannot fail. And I don't think it is, sensible to create any problems between these two countries. And I believe, although Tun Mahathir was a bit firm on some of the earlier contracts, which is okay, confine it to that particular problem and try to resolve it. On a bilateral basis through a series of negotiations and things like that. And I think you should take into this consideration, although I mentioned in a lighter vein, but I understand, I mean it, that it is not just dollars and cents, but take into consideration the nuances, the sensitivity, the need to look forward and to forge that strong bond between the two nations. And because you are losing the ground, because the younger generation does not have the same exposure and experience and relationship as the first generation or the second generation. So you have to understand that, and therefore we need to take additional effort, which I mentioned to Prime Minister Sen Loong when I met him first time after I was in prison, although I was just accompanying the Deputy Prime Minister. Was Anwar's role. In Malaysia, they're very, very formal. The arrival of Right Honourable Deputy Prime Minister Dr. Wazizah Ismail, accompanied by Anwar Ibrahim. So my role is just to accompany a good spouse. So when I accompanied as a good spouse to call on the Prime Minister when he was there, Prime Minister Sen Loong, the meeting was very, very cordial, very good, and we reassured. It was, to me, it's a very good gesture for Prime Minister Sen Loong to be, the first to come and visit. And I think these signals are important, because this goes beyond just diplomatic encounters or business deals. But I think to rebuild the trust. I don't believe, frankly, after having said this, I honestly don't believe that there is a problem.
Good to know, sir. And we're coming to the end, and there's a question here on Singapore-Malaysia relationships, which I think you've already answered. I do have to say, sir, that in defense of Singapore, since you were last time here as DPM, I think things have changed. All our younger ministers now know how to karaoke. I think it's probably a requirement for political office. So we're also able to hang loose and be more chilled, like most of our counterparts in ASEAN countries. There's one last question, I think. I can take one last question, and then we'll have to close for today.
Thank you. Datuk Sri, very nice to see you. Last time I heard you in public forum was back in 1996 in Malaysia. So just following on some of the political developments in Malaysia, there has been a lot of news picking up over the last 72 hours over the Port Dickson by-elections. How to think about it? Is it the platform, the step towards what you described as coming back, changes in timeline, or is it just a part of the bigger plan?
As I mentioned earlier, in January this year, when I was still in prison, the plan was then agreed upon by party leaders. That is why Tun Mahathir issued a statement yesterday that he supports that move, and that that's well within the plan. In Malaysia, the constitution is very clear, specific, that a person to assume premiership, one has to be an elected member of parliament. So what was agreed upon was, upon the release, then Anwar should be a member of parliament to then later assume office. Am I in a hurry? No, because I told PM Mahathir that I will focus on parliamentary reform. I will make sure that the parliamentary committees are effective, functional, and Parliament is not just a rubber stamp for government policies. So they will then have to have reasoned discussions, dialogue with the ministers when tabling policies, and that should be my role. So the first is to contest in a by-election. I chose Port Dickson. Then it's up to the Election Commission to decide on the dates of elections. I don't take things for granted. I've been in politics a long time. I would then go down and appeal to the voters. And it is very mixed. One of the reasons I chose is because it's almost 50% Malays, close to 30% Chinese, and almost 20% Indians. So it's really a microcosm of Malaysian society. And I want to make sure, inshallah, that I get the majority of Malay votes, majority of Chinese, and majority of Indians. And of course, it's an arduous task, it's a grueling campaign. After hopefully I win, then I will sit as a member of Parliament, working and getting to know the workings of Parliament and interacting with the government leaders and PM Mahathir until the right time. If and when I assume the premiership, then I'll make sure that one of the first countries I visit will be Singapore.
Thank you, sir. With a very apt closing remark, I should only amend it by saying it should not be an if and when, it should be purely a when you become Prime Minister of Malaysia. We certainly welcome you back here again to deliver us the platform of the government at that time. I can only say in the defense of Singapore that we didn't give you lunch today because we wanted to save it for when you come back again as Prime Minister of Singapore. Ladies and gentlemen, can we have a warm applaud and thanks for Anwar Ibrahim for your being here today, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.